The cardiorespiratory system. The purpose of this lesson is to provide the health and fitness professional with a fundamental knowledge and explanation of the cardiorespiratory system. Following this presentation, the participant will be able to describe the structure and function of the cardiovascular system, the respiratory system, explain how each of those systems relates to human movement, relate how oxygen is related to energy expenditure, as well as the influence that dysfunctional breathing can have on the kinetic chain. Outline the bioenergetic continuum. It has been established that the kinetic chain is the primary system for movement production under the direct control of the nervous system. In order to maintain a constant state of efficient operation, however, it needs to have support systems. One such support system is known as the cardiorespiratory system. The cardiorespiratory system is comprised of the cardiovascular and respiratory systems. Together, they provide the tissues of the kinetic chain with oxygen, nutrients, protective agents, and a means to remove waste byproducts. This ensures optimal cellular function within the kinetic chain. This section will focus on the structure and function of the cardiovascular and respiratory systems. The cardiovascular system, Part 1. The cardiovascular system is comprised of the heart, the blood it pumps, and the blood vessels that transport the blood from the heart to the tissues of the body. A basic understanding of the structure and function of the cardiovascular system is necessary to fully understand the kinetic chain. Starting with the heart. The heart is a muscular pump that rhythmically contracts to push blood throughout the body. It is positioned obliquely in the center of the chest or thoracic cavity, lying anteriorly to the spine and posteriorly to the sternum. It is flanked laterally by the lungs. Heart muscle is termed cardiac muscle and has similar characteristics to skeletal muscle. It is made up of myofibrils containing actin and myosin that cross-bridge to cause contractions and is surrounded by sarcolemma. Cardiac muscle is for the most part considered an involuntary muscle, meaning that it cannot typically be consciously controlled. Cardiac muscle fibers are shorter and more tightly connected than skeletal muscle, thus enabling the contraction of one fiber to stimulate the others to contract synchronously. The conduction system, or means by which the muscle fibers are activated, is much different than in skeletal muscle. All cardiac muscle fibers have a built-in contraction rhythm, and the fibers with the highest rhythm determine the heartbeat or heart rate. The typical discharge rate, and thus heart rate, is between 70 to 80 beats per minute. The specialized conduction system of cardiac muscle that provides the rhythm for heart rate includes several items. The sinoatrial or SA node, which is located in the right atrium, is termed the pacemaker for the heart because it initiates the heartbeat. Internodal pathways transfer the impulse from the SA node to the atrioventricular or AV node. The AV node delays the impulse before moving on to the ventricles. The atrioventricular or AV bundle passes the impulse to the ventricles for contraction via the left and right crews and the bundle branches of the Purkinje fibers. The cardiovascular system, Part 2. The heart is comprised of 4 hollow chambers that are delineated into 2 interdependent but separate pumps on either side. These include the left and right atrium and the left and right ventricles. The atriums are smaller chambers located superiorly on either side of the heart. They essentially gather blood coming to the heart, much like a reservoir. The right atrium gathers deoxygenated blood returning to the heart from the entire body, while the left atrium gathers reoxygenated blood coming to the heart from the lungs. The ventricles are larger chambers located inferiorly on either side of the heart. They are the main pumps in the heart, as they pump blood out to the rest of the body. The right ventricle receives the deoxygenated blood from the right atrium and then pumps it to the lungs to be saturated with incoming oxygen. The left ventricle receives the reoxygenated blood from the left atrium and proceeds to pump it to the entire body. As previously mentioned, the primary function of the heart is to distribute blood throughout the body. The amount of blood that is pumped out with each contraction of a ventricle is the stroke volume. The stroke volume of a typical adult is approximately 75 to 80 milliliters per beat. The rate with which the heart contracts is referred to as the heart rate. Together, the heart rate and the stroke volume make up the overall performance of the heart and are collectively termed cardiac output. Cardiac output is the combination of how many times the heart beats per minute and how much blood is being pumped out with each beat. While it's next to impossible for a health and fitness professional to gauge the stroke volume of a client, it is relatively easy to determine the heart rate. Monitoring heart rate during exercise provides a good gauge as to the amount of work the heart is doing at any given time. To do so, place your index and middle fingers around the palm side of the wrist, about 1 inch from the top of the wrist on the thumb side. Although some people use the carotid artery at the neck, NASM does not recommend this location for measuring pulse rate. Pressure on this artery reduces blood flow to the brain, which can cause dizziness and/or an inaccurate measurement. Next, apply light pressure to feel the pulse. Do not apply excessive pressure as it may distort results. When measuring the pulse during rest, count the number of beats in 60 seconds. When measuring the pulse during exercise, count the number of beats in 6 seconds and add a 0 to that number. Adding the 0 will provide an estimate on the number of beats in 60 seconds. Or one can simply multiply the number by 10, and that will provide the health and fitness professional with the same number. For example, if the number of beats in 6 seconds equals 17, add a 0, which gives an approximate heart rate of 170 beats per minute. The next component of the cardiovascular system is blood. Blood acts as a medium to deliver and collect essential products to and from the tissues of the body. Blood is a vital support mechanism as it transports oxygen, collects waste products, brings hormones and nutrients to specific tissues, regulates body temperature, protects from injury and blood loss through its clotting mechanism to seal off damaged tissue, and provides specialized immune cells to fight against foreign toxins within the body, decreasing disease and sickness. With each pump of each ventricle, blood is dispersed throughout the body. Concurrently, blood is also re-entering the heart. In order to circulate blood properly throughout the body and back to the heart, it must have a network through which it can travel. This network is comprised of blood vessels. Blood vessels form a closed circuit of hollow tubes that allow blood to be transported to and from the heart. Vessels that transport blood away from the heart are termed arteries. The medium-sized arteries further divide into smaller arteries that are called arterioles. In turn, arterioles branch out into a multitude of microscopic vessels known as capillaries. It is here in the capillaries that substances such as oxygen, nutrients, hormones, and waste products are exchanged between tissues. Once substances are exchanged in the capillaries and waste products are gathered, they must then be transported to the proper area for cleaning and eventually back to the heart. The vessels that collect blood from the capillaries to perform this duty are called venules. Venules progressively merge with other venules and form veins. Veins then transport all of the blood from the body back to the heart. The respiratory system. The second functional component of the cardiorespiratory system is the respiratory system, often referred to as the pulmonary system. The primary role of this system is to ensure proper cellular function. The respiratory system works intimately with the cardiovascular system to accomplish this by providing a means to collect oxygen from the environment and transport it to the bloodstream for cellular utilization. In order for this to be effectively accomplished, there must be an integrated functioning of the respiratory pump to move air in and out of the body and respiratory passageways to channel the air. The respiratory pump is located in the thorax or the thoracic or chest and abdominal cavity. It's comprised of skeletal structures, or bones, and soft tissue, or muscles and pleural membranes. These systems, together with the nervous system, must work synergistically to allow for proper respiratory mechanics to occur, much the same way as these systems work together to produce everyday functional movements. The skeletal structures provide the framework for the muscles to attach to, as well as protection for the organs within the thorax. While being strong enough to provide support, they are also flexible enough to allow for the expansion and compression needed for proper breathing. These structures include the sternum, ribs, and vertebrae. The muscles that make up the respiratory pump include the diaphragm, internal and external intercostals, scalenes, sternocleidomastoid, pectoralis minor, and abdominals. The purpose of ventilation is to move air in and out of the body. However, the air must have passageways to funnel it in and out of the lungs for proper utilization. These respiratory passageways are divided into two categories: the conduction passageway, and the respiratory passageway. The conduction passageway consists of all the structures that air travels through before entering the respiratory passageway. The nasal and oral cavities, pharynx, larynx, trachea, and bronchi provide a gathering station for air and oxygen to be funneled into the body. These structures also allow the incoming air to be purified, humidified, or moisture added, and warmed or cooled to match body temperature. The respiratory passageway collects the channeled air coming from the conducting passageway. At the end of the bronchioles sit the alveoli, which are made up of clusters of alveolar sacs. It is here in the alveolar sacs that gases such as oxygen and carbon dioxide are transported in and out of the bloodstream through a process known as diffusion. This is how oxygen gets from the outside environment to the tissues of the body. Oxygen and energy. Now that we've discussed the basic structure and function of the cardiovascular and respiratory systems, let's now review how oxygen and energy are used during physical activity. Oxygen is the necessary catalyst for sustaining many bodily functions when activity is prolonged for periods of greater than 30 seconds. In these situations, activity is said to be aerobic, meaning it requires oxygen. Many activities, however, last for only a few seconds and are not dependent upon oxygen for proper execution. These activities are described as anaerobic, meaning they do not require oxygen. To generate either form of activity, however, the body must still produce sufficient amounts of energy. Energy is essentially the capacity to do work. The study of energy in the human body, known as bioenergetics, looks at how chemical energy, food, is converted into mechanical energy, work. Energy can only be productive if it can be captured and transferred to a place where it can be used. The storage and transfer unit within the cells of the body is typically adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. The supply of ATP in each cell is limited, and cells must have a means of producing more. There are three main bioenergetic pathways that produce ATP and are known as the bioenergetic continuum. Starting with the ATP-CP system. In this system, creatine phosphate, or CP, donates a phosphate group to adenosine diphosphate, or ADP, to create ATP. The ATP-CP system provides energy for primarily high-intensity, short-duration bouts of exercise or anaerobic activity. This would be seen in power and strength forms of training where heavy loads are used with only a few repetitions or during short sprinting events. However, this system is activated at the onset of all activity, regardless of intensity, due to its ability to produce energy very rapidly in comparison to the other systems. The second system, glycolysis, utilizes the breakdown of carbohydrates, or glucose, to rapidly produce ATP. While this system can produce a significantly greater amount of energy than the ATP-CP system, it too is limited to approximately 30 to 50 seconds of duration. Most resistance training workouts will place a greater stress on this system than the other systems because a typical repetition range of 8 to 12 repetitions falls within this time frame. The third system, the oxidative system, relies primarily on carbohydrates and fat for the production of ATP. This system is the slowest producing of the three systems because it requires increased amounts of oxygen to match the muscular requirement of the exercise. Oxygen must be supplied through respiration, and it takes a while to elevate the respiration rate to consume appropriate amounts of oxygen. Needless to say, this system results in a greater amount of ATP. This system becomes more involved in activities longer than 30 seconds and is the predominant system in activities over 2 minutes, or aerobic activities. The importance of all systems in the body working synergistically can be further demonstrated in the intimacy between the cardiorespiratory system and the kinetic chain. The cardiorespiratory system is a major support system for the kinetic chain. However, it is also the kinetic chain that provides essential support for the cardiorespiratory system. Muscles, bones, and the nervous system are all essential components of the cardiorespiratory system that enable it to function optimally, as discussed earlier. Thus, if there is a dysfunction in the cardiorespiratory system, this can directly impact the components of the kinetic chain and perpetuate further dysfunction. Alterations in breathing patterns are a prime example of this relationship. During shallow breathing patterns, the secondary respiratory muscles are used more predominantly, which includes the scalenes, sternocleidomastoid, levator scapulae, and upper trapezius. If this shallow upper chest breathing pattern becomes habitual, it can cause overuse of these muscles. These muscles also play a major postural role in the kinetic chain as they all connect directly to the head and neck. Their increased activity and excessive tension often result in poor upper extremity posture, headaches, lightheadedness, and dizziness. Teaching your client to breathe diaphragmatically or through the stomach can be a way to help avoid these symptoms by using their primary respiratory muscles, such as the diaphragm and transverse abdominis. Assessing one's breathing pattern can also help determine potential muscle imbalances. If they exhibit chest breathing, it may mean they have overactive secondary respiratory muscles, which may need to be addressed through flexibility training, and underactive core stabilizers, which would be addressed through core stabilization training. Summary. In summary, the cardiorespiratory system is comprised of the cardiovascular system and the respiratory system. Together, they provide the body with oxygen, nutrients, protective agents, and a means to remove waste products. The cardiovascular system is comprised of the heart, blood, and blood vessels. The respiratory system collects oxygen from the environment and transports it to the bloodstream. The respiratory pump moves air in and out of the body and respiratory passageways to channel the air. Oxygen is the necessary catalyst for aerobic activity prolonged for periods of greater than 30 seconds. Anaerobic activities that last for only a few seconds are not dependent upon oxygen for proper execution. To generate either form of activity, however, the body must still produce sufficient energy. The study of how chemical energy, or food, is converted into mechanical energy, or work, is known as bioenergetics. ATP has the ability to store the large amounts of energy needed for muscle contraction in order to perform physical activity. However, the supply of ATP in each cell is limited, and cells must produce more through the bioenergetic continuum, which consists of ATP, creatine phosphate, and the glycolysis systems, or anaerobic systems, and the oxidative pathway, anaerobic system. Alterations in breathing patterns can directly impact the components of the kinetic chain and lead to further dysfunction. If the breathing patterns become more shallow, the body uses secondary respiratory muscles more than the diaphragm, which can negatively impact